Hello everyone, I'm Slim Otman, the event manager for Architect Hub Qatar. We are happy today for our second Hub talk. It's monthly Hub talk today. It's the second one in 2021. It will turn around the Colurphobia is the architect disease. Our speaker for today is Julia Brooker. So before starting, allow me to define the Architect Hub in few words. The Architect Hub Qatar is a non-profit architectural association registered in Qatar under the Qatar Financial Center Authority. Our Hub Talks are events to harness the diverse and the intellectual wisdom of the crowd, keeping architects connected to peers and the wider market, local and global. Besides, let me remind you that our session is recorded. We will be live streaming on Facebook as well. Please abide by these simple rules. All the attendees should be on mute during the talk. After that, we will open the floor for you to engage and to know more about Julia works. Please raise your hands or send your inquiry on the chat if you have any comment or question. Before giving the speech to Julia, let me speak a bit about her. She's a painter and an artist from UK. After the university, she lived in France and then moved to Cardiff with her young son. There, she worked with architects and contractors, project manager. She was managing £1 million construction. This unusual experience for an artist means she has a positive and practical attitude to finding solutions. When Julia's son was 18, he left home for college. Julia did it too. She had always wanted to be a painter. She went to our colleague and gained a first-class degree in fine arts painting at Cheltenham. After graduation in 2000, Julia set up her studio in Cardiff. Since then, her contemporary painting was being exhibited in London, Stuttgart, Amsterdam, Latvia, Italy, Hong Kong, New York, Moscow, and Tokyo. Thanks again for attending, and I'm sure you will enjoy her talk for tonight. Also, let me thank Nova Color, who are our sponsor for today. Nova Color are always supporting us in our Hub Talks, in our events. Thanks again, Nova Color, and we hope to see you again. So, Julia, the floor is yours, but I think you need to, you were asking that everyone present himself to you. So, please just, if you presentation to Julia, she wants to know you one by one.
Oh, well, if it's possible.
Can you start, Omaima?
Yeah, okay.
You calling me? I can't hear you.
Yes, Omaima.
Okay, great. Omaima Osman, architect, interior designer, a fan of Julia Brooker, and happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. What again?
Yeah. All right.
Maureen?
You might want to call them out by name. Eduardo, perhaps?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Maureen.
Oh, Maureen, yes, great.
I'm an architect and educator. I design programs for education about sustainable cities and the built environment. And I love this topic. I love color, but I am always afraid. It's like you were speaking to me, so I'm really happy to join. I used to be in Qatar, and now I'm in the United States, so I miss hello to all of my friends in Qatar. Nice to see everybody, and nice to meet you, Julia.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Hey.
Architect Abdullah?
Abdullah Al-Bakir, architect and urban planner, member of the board of Architect Hub. Looking forward for Julia's lecture. Hopefully it will be a great one. we'll hopefully we'll learn a lot from it and transfer the knowledge. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
So more. Eduardo. Julia?
Yeah, do you want me to start?
I think, yes, I think it's better that you start and we'll meet after in the chat so
Yeah,
that we'll
sure.
gain a bit of time.
Yeah, of
Okay, I'll
course.
just share for you,
Okay,
share the
lovely.
presentation.
All right, thank you.
On screen, just a moment. Okay. Yes, I think you can see my screen, yes?
Yeah, okay, yes I can, thank you. Can you hear me all right? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, this is a picture of me in my studio. I had my biggest project ever was for the UBS Bank in Hong Kong. And you can see in the picture, that's 3 of the paintings. There was actually, and they're 1.4 meters wide. There's 3 of them, and there were 23 rows stacked up when they were installed. They went right up the building. And that was a very demanding project, actually, particularly as it started with an inspiration from this painting, which you may be able to see, which is very small. But yeah, so I have many clients all around the world, in Hong Kong and in Japan, and I have paintings in UAE and Saudi Arabia, not in Qatar yet, but I hope that that may happen in the future. Okay, thank you. You could move to the next page for me. Thank you. Colorphobia, chromophobia, is it the architect's disease? I'm going to be talking about British and European culture and art and architecture. I don't know much about your part of the world, so I hope to learn more when I come to visit you. So thank you. We have the next page. Yep, thank you. Yes, so in Europe in the Middle Ages, my vision of these actually aren't original 12th century photographs, as you can imagine. They are obviously reconstructions, but everything was brown, I think, unless you were very, very rich, brown or gray. Brown food, brown bowl, brown spoon, brown bread, brown clothes, and a very dirty brown little hut to live in. So when we get to the next page, we, can I do that? Can I do the next page? Yep. There we are. Now, this is a very interesting experiment that was carried out by the BBC, the television company for Britain. They, this is the west front of a cathedral in Wells in South England, which was, they started building in 1137, and it was completed about 100 years later. And in its original form, it would have looked like this, very bright, very vivid. And you cannot quite see it, but in the detail of it, there was actually 400 carved saints and apostles from the Christian church. And they would have been almost life-size. And they were brightly painted. And there were little windows between the figures. And in those windows, when it was a special religious day, the choir and the musicians would stand and they would play their music and sing their songs, their hymns out of these little apertures. So it would have been quite an amazing spectacle in the 1200s when, as I say, nearly everything else was just dull and brown. And this kind of colour was not available to the ordinary person. It would only have been seen in a royal court or something like that. Okay, next page, please. Actually, do that. Yeah, the next page, please. So, oh, we've missed a page now. Can we go back? Yeah. Now that is what the cathedral looks like now. It is plain. It is still got all the statues, or 300 of the statues, but it is plain, unpainted stone. We know that the paint was there because they found little scraps of bright paint in the crevices around the figures. But now, 800 years later, it is just plain stone. And to the European eye, that looks a lot more tasteful. Can we go on to the next page? Next page, please, Slim. Thank you. And the reason why, certainly to a European's eye, the unpainted cathedral looks more tasteful and attractive is, to my mind, colourphobia, that Europeans see bright colour as too obvious, too loud, too brash, too not cultured, not suitable for a place of worship. And I think one of the key factors in that was the Italian Renaissance, which spread over 200-300 years, starting in the 14th century in Italy. And their architecture standards were very much about balance and calm control of all the components of a building. And if we go to the next page, please, we can see, again, this is a detail of how the top of a column should be constructed. And it was said at the time, colour is really inferior and not important. The important thing is the scale, the proportion, the form, and that was the thing that made a building great. Okay, next page, please. Then within the, in Britain and Europe in the 19th century, industrialization started up and we got mass manufacture occurring. And then a lot of people got drawn into working in those factories. There wasn't the same amount of rural poor. Suddenly, well, they were the urban poor. But after industrialization had got going, domestic goods started to be made, and they were made in bright colors. And tin was very popular for household goods. We've got a tea tray here, a little cup and saucer and teapot, and some sweet tins done in bright colors with popular images. And this contributed, I think, to the idea that began to grow that color was cheap and not valuable, because these cheaply mass-produced goods were made in these bright colors. And even, it's quite interesting, I started to look at the history of fabric dyes. And in the 19th century, there was a new, up until then, really, dyes were based from plants and they became synthetic. And they were, it was actually one of the major types of dye, synthetic dye that was created, was called an aniline dye. And that actually was a waste product of coal tar, which of course, you know, the Industrial Revolution, which was fired by coal and fire and steam, there would have been a lot of coal tar. So that's next page, please. So industrialization, I think, had a lot to do with color. And then, can we go back a page? Thank you. Now, in the turn into the 20th century, a very exciting new piece of technology was the radio, which was then known as wireless. And the early models were made in a very early form of plastic to look brown because they were intended to mimic wood. Then, as time went by, we found they could make this plastic, which an early form of which was Bakelite. They could make it in new colors. And this peppermint green that you see was a very popular color to have in your home. So radios became more numerous and more colorful and cheaper. Have the next page, please. Thank you. And then we come, not quite sure where our lady on the screen's lost her head. I don't quite know where she went to, but these are two advertisements that were produced in the 1950s to advertise a type of plastic box called Tupperware, and they were it was made in the US, and they were exported certainly all over Europe, and they became very popular, and they were very pretty colors, and they were very numerous, they were plastic, they were clean, and so on. And again, I think that re-emphasized the role of color as something that's a bit trivial and really belongs in the domestic home, not on the grand scale of outdoor public life. So we come to color being colorblind. Now, it's an interesting fact that color blindness is much more common in men than it is in women. And when we think about history, we think about who's formed the ideas about architecture and art, who's been the art critics, who's been the designers and the builders, the patrons, the specifiers, the buyers. Up until very recently, that has almost always been the men, and a lot of them suffer from color blindness. And this little test here, you can see for red-green color blindness is actually the most common form. And on the other side of the slide, you can see what they've made up as a simulation of what it looks like if you have one of the three different types of color blindness. And it is in fact true that there are very few colorblind people who can see no color, but there is a very subdued, paler kind of perception of color. And I think that may have contributed to why color wasn't considered very important, because quite a lot of the people who were forming opinions and making decisions couldn't actually see the color. So thank you. Can we go on to the next page now, please? So then we come to architecture in particular and the 20th century and to white. And the architect Le Corbusier, French architect, was extremely influential. This was one of his buildings, which was completed in 1929. And I think it's interesting to put it in the context that only 11 years before had been the end of a very bloody and very widespread war in Europe and other parts of the world, where 40 million people were dead. And I think, to my mind, the whiteness and the cleanness and hygienic appearance of this building must have been part of its modern appeal. You know, the new century, and we want new things. You know, after a war, people are tired and they don't want the drab and the dreary and the miserable. So I think that is perhaps why the white became so important. Can we have the next one, please? And another example of slightly older, further into the century, and this was Frank Lloyd Wright, who was a very, again, very influential architect, American. And this is his design of the Guggenheim Art Museum in New York. And it is, 60 years later, it is still a quite extraordinary building. You can see that on the interior view, that the way into the gallery is actually a gradual spiral up this dome shape, and leading off the spiral staircase are the different galleries, but you progress up the building to see the artwork. And I think it's a wonderful example of the form. Oh dear, we've got the wrong PDF. Can we jump that page, please? Because oh dear, can we go, Slim, while we're looking at this, could you find the other PDF, please? The one that I sent most recently. No, this, if you go back, yeah, to page 14 is fine. We go on to page 15, please. All right, thank you. If we could stay there for a minute, and if you could find the PDF that I sent most recently, it has got some extra images in it that follow on, and it would be very good to see those if we possibly can, please. But I'll keep talking about this page because the next few pages are the same. So what's been happening in European architecture is that in 2020 and 2021, a lot of architects seem to have suddenly jumped from the very influential white buildings that we had at the beginning of the 20th century, and they have gone to black, which I have to say I think is very much a retrograde move. I think they look dreadful. I think they must be very unpleasant to live in. The one on the right is a music studio, but the others are actually intended for people to live in. They seem to have no windows, and they're this dreary black. I mean, I'm a woman who likes black, but I don't think a whole building really works in that way at all. I think it's really rather miserable. So can we have the next page, please? Right, this is now the modernism, obviously going back to Le Corbusier, the French architect. This was a really quite shocking, to the modern eye, a very shocking housing estate that was built in the north of England. It was built supposedly inspired by Le Corbusier, but as you can see, it's not a single dwelling in a lovely green garden. It is hundreds. In fact, it's actually thousands, because this is only a small section. It was a formation that actually snaked around in sort of like an S and then another S. And as you can see, it looks pretty grim. And as time went by, it wasn't maintained. And I think this is what's certainly given flats in Britain a very bad name, in that they tend to be associated with poor quality, low maintenance, and generally unattractive. So this is where the white concrete ideal ended up for ordinary people in, running ordinary lives. We have the next page, please. This is a young man called Paul Eis. He grew up in Austria near the war between East Germany and West Germany, as it was then. And he started to take photographs of the buildings that were built by that government, which was a communist government. And they too seemed to suffer from the same problem of being really very dreary. And he started to take photographs and manipulate them to show how they could look. Excuse me. And if we could have the next page, please. And he equated this with happiness. Excuse me. So this would originally have been a very dull grey, probably water-stained concrete, and he transforms it so it looks like a sort of happy holiday resort. And the next page, please. Thank you. And again, he's done the same thing here. He's saying it's not a literal design, but he wants people to feel that architecture can be inspiring and that the colour can be an important part of making something, a space that people live in, more attractive and pleasant for them. We have the next page, please. Then we come into, and again, obviously it's wide generalizations, but some of the things that we've seen architecture in the end of the last century and the beginning of this century. And there have been some amazing advances in the types of materials that architects and construction can use. And this one, obviously, by Zahid Hadid's practice, used concrete, reinforced concrete and polyester. And indeed, it is absolutely outstanding. It's quite extraordinary. I mean, I must say, I think from my experience of going on to site, I do wonder, I think it must have been how on earth they constructed it and kept it so white. I do not know. I mean, actually making it seems to me as much, if not more, of an achievement than actually drawing it. But it is an extraordinary thing. But it doesn't have any colour. So I continue to say white still dominates in a lot of things, even when the form is actually very interesting and very intriguing. We have the next page, please. This is another one. Again, I think this has been a very influential building, Frank Gehry. And this is the Guggenheim in Bilbao in Spain. And it is really, it is a very, very striking building. And I think it's influenced an awful lot of different people. And I think it's a fantastic building. You know, I saw it a few years ago myself. But I'm sorry, Frank, it doesn't have any colour. So yeah, it gets lots of points, obviously. But just to make the point that, you know, we still don't really seem to want to use colour in our buildings. Now the next page, please. So my question is, how can we bring colour into buildings? Obviously, to me, to my mind, being an artist, I think the answer is employ an artist. Now this is quite an old example, a very old example. Henri Matisse, a French painter, a very wonderful and influential artist. He did, at the end of his life, he designed these stained glass windows for a very small chapel in the south of France, in a place called Venice, which is a little village. Again, I have been there, and it's tiny. You know, it's like a village hall. You know, it is not a big place at all. It's not a big grand construction, and in fact, it looks pretty ordinary on the outside. But the inside is absolutely gorgeous, flooded with this lovely colour. He also designed the ceramic tile, the white ceramic tiles on the wall, and he designed giant line drawings to go on those. And again, I've yet to see any other examples I've seen of that. So we have the next one, please. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about Matisse in case you're not already aware of him. The black and white photograph shows him doing some of the drawings, which were then reproduced on the white tiles for the chapel. And the photograph of the man in the wheelchair is Henri Matisse himself. At the end of his life, he wasn't able to stand and paint. So he, from the 40s onwards, he designed a new way of working where he would paint sheets of paper with opaque colour, with gouache, which is very saturated colour. And the sheets were painted with this colour. And then with a pair of scissors, he would cut round and make shapes, which he would then stick on the wall of his studio. You can see one in the background there, the wheelchair picture. Behind it, he's got a figure. You can just see half of the figure. And he went on to make these, the exhibition, the blue nudes and other swimming shapes that you can see in the image of the MoMA in New York, Museum of Modern Art in New York. Can we have the next page, please? This is just to show again, Matisse is known for relatively small paintings, you know, a metre or so, but these are two very big pieces which were in an exhibition in the Tate Gallery in London, and the biggest one is almost 10 metres long, and it was an extremely popular exhibition. Over 500,000 people visited, 560,000 people went to see it, and including myself, and it was really uplifting and wonderful to see such colour and joy. And then you remember, you know, he was in his 80s when he did a lot of this work. So I think he's an example to us all of what you can do with some joy and using colour to really lift people's spirits. And I have to say, given recent world events with all this dreadful disease, that virus, I think we need some colour to cheer us up. Can I have the next one, please? This is quite an interesting building. This is it's an IMAX cinema, which does very huge and very lifelike screenings of films. and it's a circular building in the middle of a roundabout in central London. And obviously you can see it's got a glass and steel exterior. Behind that, and I don't know the construction details, which would be good to know, wrapped around it, there is a reproduction of a very big red painting by a painter called Gerhard Hodgkin. I went to see it when I was doing my dissertation, so the close-up was taken by me from the side of the road just to get a chunk of it, and a bit of some London bus there as well. They changed that image. It's not always the same. I don't know how it's constructed, but I think it's an interesting idea that would be worth looking at to as a way of introducing colour into architecture. Now, the next page, please. This is just a very quick sort of sideline, really. This elderly man here is Gerhard Hodgkin. He is the painter whose design was used. And I just wanted to mention him because he takes the view that he does colourful paintings, and he is very strongly of the view, or rather was, because unfortunately he's no longer alive, but he took the view that his very colourful paintings should actually be exhibited on very dark grey walls. And I went to this exhibition, which is quite a long time ago now, in London, and the walls were where you can see the photograph of him. They had to use a flash in order for him to be visible, because the walls were almost as dark as his shirt. They were very dark charcoal. It was an absolutely striking exhibition because the walls were dark charcoal grey, and his paintings, quite a lot of them were relatively small, like the one there, gold background, gold frame, relatively small, and then they had spotlights on each painting. So they were like jewels. It was a big room, and each painting looked like a jewel. And the mustard colour wall in the Tate, he chose that himself, and he was very particular about what shade it should be to complement the artwork. But it's really just to make the point that, you know, contemporary paintings don't have to be in a white cube, which I think is what we all tend to assume. Thank you. Go to the next page. Then this is about glass, and I'm a big fan of glass. These are 3 pieces. I only know the one in the Tate Gallery in St. Ives, and that is huge. I haven't got the sizes there, but it's where you can see there's a door at the side there. So it's a very big piece, designed by an artist. The middle one is by a man called Martin Donlin, and on the right-hand side, a Welsh artist who lives just 30 miles down the road from myself. She designed this big window here. I don't know what building it is, but you can, you know, her name is Amber Hiscott. She has a website with all these images on, as does Martin. Thank you. And the next page, please. Then when I was doing some research for this talk, I discovered this extraordinary man called Tom Fruin. I think he's American, and on either side of these images, the tall image in the middle is made by Amber Hiscott, the artist who lives down the road from me. She designed them, and they're huge towers of curved glass, which are very striking indeed. But either side are these 2 constructions, and it appears to be like the old-fashioned traditional stained glass, where it's lead that's holding it together, but lead is quite soft, as we know. So I think there must be some other, I don't know whether the framework is something else and then it's lead within that. I don't quite know how he does it, but I just wanted to put them in because I thought that those are extraordinary. And I just thought it would be really good for people to see his work. He has a website at tomfruin.com, and I think that would be worth finding out more about, because he has some very interesting ideas about bringing colour into buildings. Okay, the next page, please. This is something that I'm really interested in as well, I guess, particularly because I am a painter and I tend to think in 2 dimensions. And I found this project very interesting. It's not especially colourful, as you can see, but they are huge glass screens that are, there's a fixing which takes them so that they go into the ground by, I think, about that much. And then there's a special fixing mechanism, but it's strong glass, and obviously it's got all the safety qualities and everything, but it's actually out of doors. And they actually serve quite a useful purpose, actually, because Bridlington is a seaside resort in Yorkshire, and it's reputed to be very windy. Even in the advertisements, they used to say it was bracing, which means cold. So I think these glass screens would actually break the wind and provide sheltered places to sit. But also, as you can see at night, when they're illuminated, they really are very striking. And I guess that goes to show, doesn't it, as we know, that lighting is so important in so many aspects of architecture and buildings. Okay, thank you. Next page. And this was just quite an interesting thing I found out about polycarbonate, obviously, which is a form of a type of plastic, clear sheets, which can be produced very large now. And I was particularly interested to read, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of people who make this. I just happened to find this company, and they describe their product, which they call deco color. They say it can be completely opaque, from the outside, but have perfect daylight on the inside, and it's got color. The inside layer of the sheet and the outside layer can have different colors, and it can be opaque from the outside but bring daylight on the inside, which I thought was really interesting, because you know, when you get into big cities, and people have these flats and apartments built, and they have huge windows, floor to ceiling windows, and I always think, well, yes, but do you really want to be, do you really, you know, where is your privacy? You know, you're in a city, you know, unless you're always closing your curtains, you know. But I thought this polycarbonate, I don't know much about the specification or anything about it, but it seems to me that that is another idea that could be developed to bring more colour into buildings with big windows, but also to still give people privacy, which obviously you need in living rooms and bedrooms and bathrooms and so on. Thank you. And I've got a bit of a thing about minimalism. I do think it's so miserable. I mean, these do look like almost prison cells, don't they? And they don't seem to have any windows. So there seems to be a window phobia going on here. So it's a light phobia as well as a colour phobia. So I do think those are pretty grim. Right, let's go on to the next one. So we'll say goodbye to minimalism. This is a British designer. All this work is by one designer. Her name is Trisha Gild. She set up in the 1970s, designing fabrics, and then she got into wallpapers. And I just think she's been very influential, certainly, I think, in British interior design and probably other European countries. And I think it's quite interesting that obviously some of the work is more floral on a smaller scale, but some of these are actually very big and very striking for big spaces. And I think, you know, it's nice to see somebody promoting colour and pattern, and it also being really attractive at the same time. Thank you. The next one, please. Right, and this is an artist who I enjoy his work very much. I went to an exhibition to see his work, and it was in a very small gallery, well, a fairly small gallery, and there was an arched wall. So as you walked, it was a big white wall with a little archway in it, and in that archway was framed a section of this painting, this yellow painting you can see here. So it's just like a section of it. And then when you went into the room, it seemed to go on forever. It was huge and so joyful and so happy, and just absolutely lifting your spirits. I defy anyone to see them and not be bowled over. He was a very, again, he's no longer alive. He was a very lively gentleman. I went to see him give a talk, and you know, it was lovely to see somebody who's still very alive, or was then. Sorry. Thank you. Can we have the next one? This is another British painter, David Hockney, and he was well known for his paintings in LA, Los Angeles, where he went. He was born in Bradford, and then went to LA because he loved the bright sunshine. And in recent years, he's been back living in Britain, and he's been doing these very colourful and very big landscapes. And this was in an exhibition at the Royal Academy, and again, they had hundreds of thousands of people go to see it. It really appealed to an awful lot of people. And he's a very pleasing person to see him talk, because he's not at all pretentious. He's very Yorkshire, and they are always reputed to be very feet on the ground, practical people. And yet he produces these huge and very numerous paintings. So he's a very interesting person to find out a bit more about. Okay, thank you. Then this is another artist, British artist again, called Ian Davenport, and his main way of working is by pouring paint. As you can see there, he's got a big pink puddle, and he has his canvases upright, and then he pours the paint down, and you get this puddling at the bottom. Can we have the next page, please? And this is a view which I thought was a really brilliant photograph. And this is a photograph of the final piece there. It was entered into the Venice Biennale, which is a big prestigious art event. And this is the same painting in the studio, and you can see it's a huge wall, and the paints come down and it all pools. And you know, the floor is nearly as interesting as the painting itself. But he arranges it although it looks very spontaneous, he arranges the colours so that they move in a certain way across that space, because that is 14 meters across. Okay, thank you. This is another, these are all male artists, apart from myself, of course. I haven't been able to find any women who work as big about whom I can be so enthusiastic. So this is a German artist, Gerhard Richter, and he uses it's a bit like those things you use for cleaning your windows. You know, it's kind of like a blade, or it's a bit like what you might use for doing screen printing. So it's a long tool with a rubber, sort of strip of rubber on it, and then he scrapes the painting down, paint across or down, and then he works in oil, and then he lets it dry, and then he does it again. And so he disturbs the surface so that you can see partly the color that he's just put on, but because he's scraping it, you can also see the colors and the marks that are from the previous layers that he has made. Okay, can we have the next one, please? And they are very big. And then this is Claude Monet, and he died in 1926. And I have to say, I think he is the master. The painting you can see there is one of 8, and they are huge. And he made 8 of them. They're called the water lilies, and they were based. Obviously, canvas isn't that big, it's lots of pieces of canvas joined together, but there's 8 big paintings, and he gave them to his own country, the French nation, on the last day of the war that ended in 1918. And he wanted the paintings to envelop the viewer. He wanted the illusion of just being submerged in this moving colour, that you're almost under the water, in the water. And they're quite extraordinary because you get the reflections. You get the reflections on the water. You can see a view through the water. You can see what's in the water. It's they are really quite dazzling. And this building was built to house the paintings. He gave them in 1918. They then built two huge oval-shaped rooms, and those are the only things that are in the building. So it's a building built specially to house these 8 huge paintings. And I have to say that it's my dream, really, you know, to do these fantastic colours, paintings, and then the nation builds a building to put them in. Yes, that's a fantasy. But you know, a really wonderful building in Paris. So if you ever get the chance to go, it really is very special. Okay, and the very last page, last but one, just to say that the ideas that I'm describing here are very much inspired by a man called David Batchelor, who wrote a book called Chromo-phobia. And he sort of basically elaborates much more cleverly than I can about colour. And he's a very interesting person to read. And there's some other books there which people might be interested in looking at, which again are about colour and their role in European culture, art and architecture. And then the final page is just me again in my studio. And this is where it's another view of another, you can just see two paintings there of the 70 that I made for the UBS Bank. And again, these 3 were in oranges and golds, whereas the previous ones were mainly reds. So they're different warm colours. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you found that interesting. I just want to sort of encourage designers and architects to think more about colour, because there are some wonderful ways of making it, of putting that colour in a big public space, and it really lifting everybody, which I think we all need. So thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thanks again, Julia, for the presentation. It was pretty amazing and full of color. I will open the floor to our attendees if they want to ask anything or they want to inquire about anything.
Okay.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you. I hope you found that interesting.
Thank you, Julia, for the colorful lecture. I have a question. How will this, we have, as you know, there is a regulation usually implemented by the municipality or the urban planning. And usually they force the off-white. Right. So mainly people are not allowed to have all this colors. You might see few buildings, but mainly all off-white. So right. I want you to elaborate on that.
All right.
Should they change the regulation, or should we stick to the off-white, or should we have something mixture, or what? Improve our architecture.
Well, I thought about this a lot, and I think that I tried to find some examples of buildings that the exterior is coloured, and I have to say there are some, but there's an awful lot which are really not really very attractive to my view. So I came to the conclusion, I thought about this a lot, because obviously I wanted, and I think that actually I think actually having a neutral colour to the outside of a building, I actually think makes sense in an awful lot of ways, because I think otherwise you could end up with something that really looks, you know, if you've got a purple one here and a green spotted one there or whatever, it could end up looking like a bit of a mess. So, but I think, so I feel I can accept neutral colors on the outside, and then that means you can use stone and wood and all those kind of materials. But that what I do feel is that if you can incorporate color into the interior, which is then the piece that you see on its own, you're not seeing it next door, who might be doing something completely different. So I would say my personal view would be to use color on the interior, and to use that in a very thoughtful way right from the beginning as part of the concept of the building. That's what I think. That's what I think it's most successful.
How about the sculptures? When we have like sculptures in the middle of the road, like in the island or in the roundabout, or this is also have an effect. People might look at it and have an accident. People might try to take photos and have an accident.
Yeah.
How will you solve that, or how will you? Would you suggest like certain area where people should not affect the road? Like we have something in the Corniche, it's more glassy. There is like a reflection in it. Sometimes you feel this reflection in your eyes.
Yeah.
It's a small monument or a small decoration made of a glass or made of a steel. When the sun comes in it, you can see the reflection. Immediately it might affect the drivers.
Yes.
So what do you think? Where should we locate this type of color building, or color sculptures, or color waterfront, or walls, or
I think you're right. I think that quite often you see it with advertising billboards as well and things like that, that they can be quite well, they're designed to be distracting in the case of advertising, aren't they? I think that having a solitary piece of sculpture somewhere doesn't necessarily work that well. I think it'd be better to build in an area which might be quite big. I think really I would like to see sculptures more incorporated into public parks. We have an idea in the UK which we call we have some sculpture parks. There's the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, which you might find interesting. There's also some woodland that's where they've commissioned artists to make sometimes very big pieces of sculpture, but they're in the woodland, so it's in a more natural environment. But I think just having a piece, even however good it might be, but as you say, in the middle of a roundabout or at the side of the road, I feel, even if it's a really good piece of art, which they're not always, that it doesn't really work very well, I don't think. I think you're right. I think you need like a walk, somewhere you can walk around and look at them, and maybe sit down and have your sandwich. You know, it could be a place where people have their lunch. You know, you sit down, you eat your sandwich, you drink your drink, and you're looking at this fascinating sculpture in front of you. Maybe have like a sculpture garden. That's how I would approach it if I was in charge of the world, which sadly I'm not. Or perhaps it's just as well.
Thank you.
Actually, I was just at a, I'm living in the United States in Houston, and I was just at a campus where they have an installation. I just sent a link. It's called Color Field. So all across the campus, they have colorful art, and obviously it's an enclosed campus, or a place where you're walking and not driving, but it has an incredible impact and ability for communication in a whole nother way to interact, because usually obviously buildings are certain like more mono drab colors. So, but actually I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. So relating to this as well, I was in an exhibit for Cruz Diaz, and he has these color saturations, and one of the guards in the museum was like, oh my God, I can't stand standing next to this, because when this color comes on, I feel like it's really angry. Oh. And so my approach is, and my question is for you, like, because architects are thinking longer term, there's so many stakeholders, there's so many things, color has so much cultural context and it can bring up different emotions for different people. And so I guess I'm curious, how do you approach that? Like when you have a commission or you're trying to make something that obviously will have a positive impact.
Yeah, I think, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm certainly not saying all color is good and no color is bad.
Oh yeah, I'm just it was just a comment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But I think that I think one of the interesting things is, certainly in Britain now, artists get commissioned to make artwork to go into hospitals, and of course hospitals started off being very sterile, and obviously the main purpose was to try and keep it as clean as possible for obvious reasons. But they are now introducing artwork into hospitals in a sense of trying to create, because people go in there very anxious, sad, worried, etc. So the idea is that people are now designing artworks to go into a hospital. So, which obviously is a very delicate matter. So, I mean, you don't want lots of red, you've got to be really careful about what colors you use. And I think that if you commission an intelligent and thoughtful artist whom you are confident about, then the way that I work with people is I say, well, what is the feeling? What is the atmosphere that you want to create here? So if it was a bar where it's mainly sort of young people partying, then you would have a very different kind of approach to if it's, a hospital ward where people are desperately ill. So I think you can use color, but it doesn't have to be primary colors, and it doesn't have to be a paint pull of the whole lot. There's a lot of subtle things you can do. So I think color can work in a lot of environments, but it needs to be made site specific, I think, to work really well if it's a big piece, because otherwise, as you say, it could dominate and actually make life worse for people rather than better, which obviously isn't what we want to do. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question enough. But I think
I'm just thinking, but like, because this might explain maybe the color phobia. Like I always say, I can draw or I can assemble things, but I'm not going to be an expert on color. Although I love to have a colorful home and all these things. It's maybe being trained being trained in color, so you're not as afraid to use it. But what about fads? Every year there's like the color of the year, and I can only think of there was a time when just particular in the United States, everybody had this like green enamel color for kitchen appliances and all these things. And if I look at it now, it has such a connotation. I guess you could put it in another context, but how do you? I'm just curious about the.
There are fashions in colors, aren't there, as there is in clothes and food and furniture. I think it's a mistake to follow fashions in a building, because obviously a building has a long life. So I think it's important that the color suits the purpose and the function of the building and the kind of environment people are trying to choose. And in a way, fashion is a bit to avoid, really, because it will date it so much, won't it? Unless you actually want it to, which I suppose you might, but generally speaking, I think you probably don't. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that peppermint green of the radio, I mean, the house that I live in was built in 1929. And when I moved in, it hadn't been decorated since about 1929. And that peppermint green was just, if it wasn't peppermint green, it was a really horrible yellow. And if it wasn't a really horrible yellow, it was a kind of horrible apricot. So yeah, it was very, very, those colors always make me think of that period. Yeah.
Julia, I think it's so interesting to bring colors inside our building, our homes. But as I see, you are only using chemical paints. How about thinking to use like natural things, green walls now? Can just make it a green wall, and with the time, it will have yellow leaves, brown leaves, sometimes red leaves.
Yeah.
it will change every day, and it will be like a green wall. I think
Yeah.
it could be interesting.
Yeah, I really like the
about that.
idea of having big plants, big trees in big plants in buildings. I think especially in our cities where people maybe they might even be traveling to work in the dark or in an underground train. They are surrounded by roads and buildings, and they hardly ever see any nature, any grass or trees. Yeah, I think when people live in huge cities, then yeah, they really need to see some trees and some greenery. So yeah, I'm very much in favor. I love to see big plants in buildings. I think, you know, obviously it needs to be designed properly and to be maintained, because I think this is one of the other things is that designers sometimes forget about is it has to be easy to maintain. Otherwise, it looks great on day one, and then by the end of year two, if the plants have all died, it's not going to be very uplifting. So yeah, but yeah, I agree very much. Yeah.
Umayma, I think you have something to say.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. That was very insightful. Beautiful, actually. It made me ponder so many things. But one quick question I want to ask you about your own personal style, your own work. You prefer to work on aluminium. Can you give us some information or some insight about that specific
yeah, sure.
material and what kind of paints you use? It would be lovely to know. And if it works interior and exterior also, like can you clad a wall with that?
You could, but it wouldn't be I think you can get aluminium, coloured aluminium produced, manufactured, and I think that would be more suitable. Because what I do is I use the aluminium, and I use it because it's a metal and because it's light reflective. This is very big, but you know, if you can, I better not move it. I'll put it off the wall. But it reflects light. So what I was drawn to was the fact that I could use, and I use acrylic paint, which is a water-based paint. It's a very expensive paint, but it's got a lot of colour in it, so you can water it right down, and it still has rich colour. And if you layer that on the light reflective metal, then as you walk past it, it changes. So it can be, you know, it's very versatile. I can do a lot of different things with it. And I like the fact I lay it flat and I work on it flat. So sometimes I use the paint very thin. It's almost like water, almost like a big watercolor. And then I leave it there for maybe days, and gradually it dries, and it will maybe be in a big swirly pattern or different things. So it's the light reflectiveness, the thinness of it. I don't like canvas. I don't like that thick edge you get to it. You know, you've either got to keep it clean or it's all dripped with paint, and I don't really like either. Plus, painting on canvas to me is like trying to paint on a mattress. It's sort of bouncy. I don't like it.
That's interesting. But how does a water-based color remain over time? How does it age? Does it change? Is it
No, it doesn't. Okay. No, I'm in a cheap acrylic wood. Cheap acrylic. Well, a cheap acrylic, if you watered it down, it wouldn't hold together, because in the paint you've got the part of the paint that gives you the color, and then you've got the binders which hold it together, so that it's, because a lot of color, obviously, if it comes from ground rocks or whatever, it doesn't have any stickability of its own. So you have to add something to hold it together. But the cheap ones have a lot of filler in, which is white. So that's why if you buy cheap paint, the colors aren't very good, because the actual pigments are expensive. And if you use the white filler, it makes it cheap, but you don't get the color. So I use an American paint, which was called Golden, and it was first produced for some of the very famous names in 20th century American art, you know, Rothko and Pollock, and some of the really big names. And this started off as a tiny family company, and they made the paint, and then they delivered it themselves to the studios of these who are now great artists. So they've got they've been producing acrylic paint for, well, since the 40s and 50s. So they've got, 70 years of experience, and they test things and test it. I've been there, and they test them like crazy, and they are color fast, and they last as well. They don't come off. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Just one last question. When working in a project for a piece of art for a building, at what stage does your work come in? What stage do you start coordinating with the team? Is it the interior design team or the architect, or at what stage? It would be interesting to know how that falls into place.
Well, it's really nice if I can, it depends really on the client. Sometimes, I mean, the worst scenario for me is that I get called in right at the last minute. But hopefully, when I work with some property developers in Hong Kong, and they know me very well, and they will actually call me, and I'll go and see them at a very early stage, when they've bought the site. In Hong Kong, things are probably like in Qatar, things grow pretty quick, I expect. But the building might be still on paper, or it might be just coming out the ground, and they say, well, we want something really big for the entrance. So we literally sit around a table and, we throw ideas about. But obviously that's not always possible. So sometimes I would just send people ideas, or we'd talk on the phone or by email. I've got a lot of samples in aluminium. So if you knew you wanted something, say in greens or whatever, I could actually send you some samples for you to show the client. So they've got a little flavor of how I work. And then they say, yeah, we like this, but we want this and this. So then we've got a starting point. So
yeah, that's interesting. It must be quite novel with COVID and lockdown. Everything has to be actually virtual and across countries, isn't it?
Yeah,
by mail.
That's right. Yeah, it's obviously it's a nuisance for everybody, but I'm used to working. Most of my clients are on the other side of the world for me, so I'm used to dealing with email, and because I've got a big picture library, I can send people different pictures, and they say, well, I like that, but I really want it in blue, or can we have it a bit like that but more like this? Because of course with abstract it's very hard to explain exactly what you well, you may not know exactly what you want, but it's hard to explain what you like. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you very much. Very insightful. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just ask one more question here? I was looking at the brochures that Maima forwarded. That it's really, really spectacular. I love your work. Is the aluminum is polished, or how is it treated? I'm sorry if you already mentioned that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Well, aluminium can either be anodized in the factory, or it can be not anodized. If it's not anodized, it's got a very bright, shiny surface, and it's relatively soft. You can scratch into it, which can be quite good because it makes, if you want a really sparkly background, then that would work. But the anodized is more of like a silk finish. So it really depends on, they come in the same sort of sheet size. So the maximum I can get in my studio is 2.5 meters by 1.25 meters, bigger than that. And I can't get it in. So, but so the sheet size is the same for whichever it is, but they have different qualities. So you choose it according to what it is you're trying to create for the client.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with everybody.
Sure,
All of it's really gorgeous.
Thank you.
I would like to ask, hi Julia.
Hi.
Thank you for all of this information.
That's it.
I'd like to ask you about, I've noticed that your style is mainly geometric.
Yeah.
And I see how that works in big scale, and it complements architecture in an amazing way.
Yeah.
But I would like to know, what do you think about more organic designs and landscape type of work? Do you think that would work in big architecture designs?
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously, it's got to be the right one. But yeah, I mean, I love landscape, And a lot of my work is inspired by landscape, most particularly trees. I love trees. I just think they're the most amazing things out. I don't think any humans made anything as wonderful as a tree.
I agree. I agree.
So yeah, I actually do some of my smaller works when I'm working with people who are doing, say, a hotel or an office where they want relatively small artworks. I do actually do some work on paper, and then that's quite often nature-based. It's still sort of slightly abstracted, but yeah, I think you could, I mean, that's what I thought was interesting about the David Hockney and that I showed you, because because that is, and he's done some huge pieces in that exhibition. That was a very colourful one, but some of them was, when I say simply, they were almost monochrome actually, but they were of life-size trees, and they were just fantastic. So if you look at the Royal Academy and see if you can find his exhibition, I nearly put some in, and then I thought, well, it's not quite, they are not actually very colourful, but they are wonderful. So,
I'll have a look.
Yeah, do. I think it'd be wonderful to have, like, especially again, as we're saying, in a city.
Yes.
People sort of live in small apartments, they don't have a lot of natural space. But I mean, it'd be rather wonderful to have a life-size sort of landscape painted on a wall, wouldn't it? I mean, that would be.
It would, absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree.
absolutely. Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have come to the end. We have more. Yes, we have more 5 minutes to engage.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to ask anything or ask something, otherwise we will say goodbye.
Does anybody? Yeah. I don't. Oh, I know. I'll show you the. Can I show people the picture that was the start of my UBS project? It's hold it up here. It was. I put it in front of my face. So that is. I don't know if you can see it. Look there. It was. Yep. But yeah, if I've got some brochures which you have, so everybody's very welcome to have a copy if you'd like. I have other PDFs of other work as well. The way I work generally is some of the brochures and PDFs have completed work. Some of them have like a small sample, which is an idea that I want to make big. And as soon as somebody wants to commission me, then I can make it big. So I've got lots of ideas that are sort of ready to go. So when we do have short timescales, that is still possible. When I have an order, that is what I do. That is my life until it's done. I've never ever missed a deadline in 20 years. And I organize all the shipping myself, and I have a local person who makes the cases for me. So I'm very experienced in getting things to site on time. And I think that's where the fact I've worked on construction sites pays off, because I know, it's got to be on the day that you say it's got to be. There's no room for delays or anything. So I am very, very good at, once we've agreed a timeline, that's what happens. Okay.
So I think we are coming to the end now. Before closing, Julia, can you just give us any last piece of advice for architects?
I'm sorry? My favorite architect?
Advice?
Oh, advice to architects?
No. Yeah.
Advice. Employ an artist. Preferably me. No, that's my advice.
It would be a pleasure. It would be a pleasure. Yes.
Thank you. It's been lovely. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. It's lovely to
Thank you. Very inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was great, Julia. Thank you. Really, really appreciate it.
Nice
Thank
to see
you.
everybody.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So,
Thank you. Thank you very
Bye.
much. Bye bye. Bye bye.
right, thanks everyone.
Goodbye.
Thanks everyone for being with us tonight. Stay tuned, and I want to thank again Nova Color for being with us always and supporting us for all our events. Thanks again, Nova Color. Thanks, Julia. Thanks to all the attendees. And stay tuned. You have many surprises in March. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you. Bye bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Take care then.
Bye bye.